Hi, my name is Sangeeta Kumar, and I'm the CEO and founder of Be the Change Consulting. Join me in Liberated AF, the workplace revolution. This is a podcast where we get to explore what does it take to become the organization that we want to work for. So what is that? The organization I want to work for, it supports my humanity and makes me feel like I belong. It's a place that isn't racist, it isn't extractive. It works for the boomers and the Gen Alphas. There's space for everyone to bring their genius to work. Don't we want to become that? And don't we want to create that? So I have been studying organizational dynamics for over 20 years, and I love working with teams stuck in an entrenched challenge to bring clarity to diverse perspectives and look for ways that human-centered systems. We're going to tell stories, we're going to answer questions, we're going to offer strategies on this podcast. Together, we are going to become something new. Let's go.
Hello, Sangeeta.
Hey, Fongy.
How goes it?
It's good. It's a beautiful day in Oakland today. Sun is out. I'm looking at butterflies outside my window. It's gorgeous.
Oh, I don't think we've kind of named it for our listeners. It's a cold, crisp fall day here in Italy where I'm at, and I'm wearing the frumpiest librarian sweater I have, and I'm so happy that it's no longer hot.
Oh, so bad for you. But your earrings are slamming. So frumpy with good earrings isn't good. It's a good vibe.
It's a vibe. It's a vibe I'm trying to, I'm going to continue to elevate. Um, and speaking about our location, you and I are constantly sharing what we're learning in the different spaces that we are in. And we are very lucky where we get invited into a lot of different spaces, often different racial and cultural places. And so today our episode is on what is racism versus cultural difference. And I know recently you've been out in the field working with some clients, and this came up.
Oh my God. Yeah. So, yeah, when we've been doing a bunch of work with like clinics and medical health practitioners. So this is one context where I'm seeing this happen. And then I have this other set of work with a bunch of schools. And then I was just talking with somebody who is a restaurant, sorry, not a restaurant, a hotel, a person who runs a bunch of hotel chains. And so these are these are three different contexts that I've been talking about where their staff, they have a bunch of staff that come from several different communities of color. Um, and so what we're seeing is there's like these cultural clashes that are happening, maybe between the Black staff that work in a place and Asian staff that work in a place, or the staff and their like the people that they're helping, right? Their clients, their patients, and they're different, right? There's these cultural expectations that are different, and there's like power, right? The power of being the person with money who is coming to receive a service, and the worker, like that's one kind of power. A doctor to a patient is another kind of power. So there's like positional power. There's differences in cultural background, which creates like, different values, different body language, different like ways of moving and being in the world. And there are different levels of power. And when those two come together, we know it's super ripe for like misunderstandings or like, yeah, just things to not land. Like my intention, what I intend to communicate might not be the impact that it has on you. And it's sometimes what I'm hearing from folks is they're like, is this a racist thing? Is it about racism? And I think there's something underneath that to pull, like when it's two groups that are not like they don't represent dominant culture, it's not quite the same as when it's like the same kind of structural racism that we might see like from a court of law versus like the patrons, right? Like there's more structural racism built in there, or in a system that has mostly white one group, whether the people delivering the services or receiving the services is white, like the power and the race dynamics are like sometimes a little cleaner to map than when it's two communities of color. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And if it's happening, and we know it happens between two communities of color, those folks have experienced structural racism. So it's in their bodies. So it's so hard not to go to that. Is this racism? Are you being racist? Am I being a racist? I was thinking about you've been doing a lot of work in the public health sector, right? And there was a couple of clients where you're working and you shared a scenario where people were they've never heard that before around someone going, "Is this racism or is this cultural difference?" And then you worked with them to kind of tease it out and separate it because there were some people who were being highly impacted because they've experienced racism their entire lives. So, would you be able to share a little bit about that without going too much into detail?
Yeah, I think, well, this question of like, is it racism? In the world of like change management, I think sometimes the need to label it racism, not racism, structural racism,
Mhm.
interpersonal racism, like, right? Like, it's not useful. So, in this clinic setting, I was working with a group of Asian staff that came like from mainland China, some from Hong Kong, lots of folks from Asia, and who had grown up there and studied there. They did a lot of their medical training there, and also some of their professional experience was there. And so we are looking at, they're working in a community that was mostly Asian, and now because of gentrification, there's more and more Black people in their community coming in to get services from this clinic. And um, there's a marked sort of feeling that the clinic is not inclusive to Black folks, compared to Asian patients. And so we were sort of like, is it because of a right? So then now we can sort of like see from that scene,
Mm.
is it because people have inherent structural racism embedded into the systems?
Okay.
Is it interpersonal racism inside of like how people are delivering services? Like how does like internalized ideas about a person that you're serving change how you deliver pain medication or take their complaints seriously, or right? There's all this research on like what happens when there's internalized racism about who you're providing services to. And when we tried, so as we were talking about it, I was like, yeah, probably we're all racist, right? We've all been socialized and conditioned to compare inferiority, or like, who's better, who's not. So yes, is it racism? Yes, we're all racist. So, but then is it the place to, is that label helping us move the conversation forward, or is it creating like an immediate, um, like a feeling for the people who are hearing it, like, wait, what? You're calling me racist? And now, like, what does that mean? And I'm not racist. Like, if it triggers confusion, or even the term racism for folks who didn't grow up here, like they may not have experienced actually living in multicultural spaces the way
Mhm.
those of us that are in the DEI world often have experienced. And so even that idea of racism, it doesn't always click. And so what we did with this group is we were like, let's take this idea of racism and put it aside. Let's actually start with like some examples of what's our own experiences in this country of where our values or identities have been uplifted and mirrored versus not. And how does that feel? So to start with like,
Mhm.
versus starting with like, here's what you're doing to make other people feel excluded. When you're work what coming to is when working with groups of people that have experienced marginalization in this country, but now have the ability or the role or the responsibility for holding space for someone else, a cultural group that's different from their own. We get to first start by saying, like, where have you experienced marginalization? And we build some empathy and some, like, we invest in their own humanity to get them sort of feeling like, oh, yeah, what does it feel like when I don't feel mirrored? And most people can feel that. They can understand that right away.
I mean, that move invest in their humanity. I think that takes time and it's what's needed and it makes sense. But it seems like it's really hard because when people are consulting or bringing us in to do this equity work and trying to support something that's happening there, they kind of want a solution right away. It's like, is it racist or is it not? What should I do? So What would you say to some folks who are listening to you right now when you're like, you're investing in their humanity, you're pausing, you're asking people to share what have they've experienced before going into the strategies?
Mhm. Well, okay, I'm not sure what I would let me this is what I think. And then maybe we can get to what I would share. Or maybe this is what I would share. You and I have worked for years with young people. And we know that experience of like as a teacher or the adult in the room of having an urgency of what you want your student to learn. Right. I really want you to learn this thing because it's going to help you do A, B, C, D, and E, and it's going to impact your whole career. And like we can escalate like how this moment is a foreshadowing of every other moment in their lives really easily,
Mm.
right? So I think the same thing happens for leaders. They're like, I'm bringing in a trainer, I'm doing a training for my staff, and I want something to change tomorrow. And so that urgency of wanting something to change, it's like a beautiful feeling. And people don't change because we're like urgently encouraging them to shift. So I think the first question is like, how do we prepare the bodies in the room to receive whatever information you
Mm.
want to offer them? So if you
Sure.
got young people and you're screaming at them to like focus, like that doesn't create focus.
That's gonna help focus, yeah.
Like you've got staff and you're like, hey, we have a problem. Our customer service numbers are dropping. Here's the satisfaction rate. Here's 20 quotes of what we've said. Like if we're building the case of how we don't have equitable levels of client satisfaction, for example, which is a lot of times how equity trainings kind of get laid out, is they build the case, right? Like they are showing using data to show like what the gap is. That all of that, what that does is it puts people in defensive mode and like, and now learning isn't happening. And so we see that, right? I see what happens when people don't, they feel shut down. They are in their own mind. They might not say it out loud, especially like I think Asian staff, like in this clinic, were very polite. They sat, they nodded, they they'll go along with like, but so not disagreeing out loud doesn't mean that they're taking it in, right? My hit was that they were disagreeing with the content in their minds or having a different set of thoughts. We weren't all activating the same mental movie. So what I would say to leaders is like you have to start in order to get people where you want them to go, you have to start by meeting them where they're at and sort of stand shoulder to shoulder with them and look at the problem together, not blame and shame as a way to encourage corrective action. Like the body learns on yes, and it slows it way down when we start with a bunch of no's.
Mm, mm.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and, someone who holds, my identity as an Asian person growing up, I was taught that when someone is holding space and when they're speaking, whether I agree or disagree with them, I would listen because
Yeah.
that's the value of respect, right? And so I can only imagine, I can only speak for myself, my younger self being in those spaces, talking about a topic that is really scary, and maybe not making sense of it, but listening to it. So I'm in cognitive overload going, am I doing it wrong? Wait, you're wrong. And so whatever you're trying to tell me, I'm not registering, but I'm sitting there. And so I'm being respectful because that is one of the values in which I hold and the thing that I'm going to offer you. And so now, fast forward to the evolution of myself where I'm learning, I'm quite an outspoken person. I'm quite, if I don't understand, I want to understand to get to know you a bit more. And so in my culture, if they were to see me now, it'd be like, oh, how come you're not holding that value of respect? But for me, I'm like, my respect is getting curious because I really want to understand what you're saying. So if you're having two cultures in the same space trying to talk about this really hard thing, but the way that they are activating respect, the way that they're activating active listening, the way they're activating, of course, disagreement, right? But all these other things differently, you said a different mental movie. That's like hella hard.
Oh, hard, yeah.
It's hella hard, right? It's like, and if it's the first time that you're doing it, and that's super hard.
Well, I don't know. I think it's what's hard, I think, is actually to that the biggest journey is to travel. Like I think when if I can travel there in my mind, like that's I've done 70% of the work. right? So if I'm like, oh, I'm not here, I am actually, I'm not looking for performative respect. I'm actually looking for people to engage with the content. And if I'm looking for people to engage with the content, then I'm looking for a different set of things. I want to hear their stories. I want to hear, like, what does, when I say for example, if I said, what does the word racism mean to you? Just turn to a partner and chat for a few minutes. And then let's just hear, like, let's popcorn out a bunch of ideas. And
Mm.
I catch myself. I might say, "Oh, I just said let's popcorn out." Maybe that's a way that I'm speaking in a metaphor, right? I'm imagining pop kernels of popcorn popping on a stove. Maybe that metaphor didn't land. So the more I start to watch for, like, is my group engaged? I start to notice, what are the words coming out of my mouth, and is it making the mental movie that I think it is in the people around me? And those things, I can't necessarily prep for them ahead of time, because so much of that language is just kind of coming out of my mouth, like, in the spur of the moment. But if I can be present enough in that session, I will find ways to change my language and change my examples and change my own stories, so that I'm getting closer and closer to what folks can at least, relate to or
Okay.
engage with. So, I'll give you one example. So, as we started to break down what's happening in this clinic, um, and why I started to go, "Oh, I don't know if it's racism, actually. I actually think it's cultural difference." We use this example of, there's like a clinic, the kind of the front desk person, the reception person, who we know, anyone who plays that reception role in a high traffic system like a hospital, like the DMV, like, like, those are hard jobs, because people come in expecting to not get what they need, and they're already stressed walking in the door, and where the receptacle of the stress kind of lands on these people, these humans who are in these roles. And so I think that, like, that compassion, like, if we haven't activated compassion for the fact that the person who's sitting in that role probably in one day hears, like, more negative complaints and more people that are frustrated than people who are so happy with their services that they receive, like, they're not gonna be able to, like you said, cognitive overload. They're sort of sitting with, like, "Well, who nobody sees the work that I do. Like, I feel like I've been a lot of people's punching bag, and where do I get any credit for that? Like, I am being a good customer service, and, I'm doing the best that I can." Those are hard jobs. So, I think we get a lot by just kind of acknowledging and naming and describing, like, what is the kinda labor that people in those roles are doing. Okay, so imagine we've done that. So then we get to this example where this person sitting in this role, um, a, um, someone comes in to the clinic. So we use this example of a Black person coming in to the clinic, and they want to see their provider. Their provider is not available. The person at the front desk tries to, explain what's going on. They don't have any more power than they have, so they have to give disappointing news. And so then this Black person gets really angry. So they get, like, upset, they raise their voice, they get big in their body, and this Asian woman who is receiving this, complaint at the desk, she shrieks. So she sort of moves, like, she described it in the room. She was like, I she showed me what she did. So what she did was she kind of hunched her shoulders, she caved in on herself, she lowered her eyes, her voice went low, and she put her hands together like she was kind of bowing. And as she was describing it, I was in the room, and there's, like, one other Black woman in the room, and we were just like, "Oh," like, I can see how what she said, we asked her, like, "What were you trying to convey?" And she was like, "I was trying to convey my deepest regrets. I'm sorry this is happening to you. Um, I don't have anything else that I can do, but I see you." So she said that, like, it was a beautiful sentiment, right? But, when I thought about how the angry person would receive that, I was like, I wonder if that person felt like you were scared of them, and
Mm.
they were too big for you, and you couldn't hold their anger. That when they got big and you got small, they sort of felt less contained, less like there's like, I'm exploding here and no one is holding my bigness. And that is a scary feeling for that person. And if your anger is not met, then it can make you more angry. So you're angry about the issue, but then you're also angry about the way that you're being received. And it might, now start a bunch of other stories of when you have not felt met or seen in a system. And I said that, and then I looked at this Black woman, and she was like, "Yep, that's exactly what I think is happening." I think that what looks like respect in Asian culture is being perceived as like racism in for Black folks. And and then like I could just feel something shift in the room because we
Mhm.
this intellectual understanding of intention, right? My intention is to communicate respect. The impact is it landed as racism. Like we have been talking about these words, but with this story, I think people in the room were like, "Oh, I get it." And so then me and this other Black staff, we modeled what we tried. We tried to model, we did a little role play of like, what else could happen? So we tried 3 or 4 different ways, and we invited people in the room to come up and try it, and they were like, "I'm not doing that." It felt too silly, too scary, too like, I don't know, but they were watching with some rapt attention. And and then we came up with like, okay, here's a move, right? Then the move you can try is to say, is to put your two hands up, stay big, and say, "I'm sorry, I see you. Let me get a manager." And then you walk away and get somebody who has more power, but you don't get small and you don't lower your eyes, right? So you try not to look like you're scurrying or running away. You try to look like you're trying to send the message that I see you. This is a problem. I'm going to escalate this by bringing in someone with more power. And that might not mean it's not an act of racism, right? That somebody shrinks when a Black person gets angry. It could be. It could be that, there's some internalized belief that like, oh, this person was always violent and now they're showing me that they're getting more violent and I'm about to get hurt. Right? So that kind of fragility might be in driving that physical response. But if we're working in this clinic and my job, right, to me in that moment, the objective is how do we sort of take care of both these people, the person sitting at the desk and the person who is getting angry, calling it racism and then trying to diagnose from there, I think makes it way harder to get the person in that clinic seat to try on some different behaviors.
I hear you. I hear you, and I also think that um, it's like you're building your analysis, you're understanding that the world is much bigger than maybe in your particular point, because I do think you mentioned earlier in the episode, the racism that we have in the United States look very differently in different parts of the world, in different countries, and they would not even use the word racism. So when you're in multicultural spaces, right, what is that word? And so here is I get you, and here is my fear also is that as people are, learning, listening to this episode, and they hear, okay, there's another way of holding or understanding this cultural difference. I also think, but you've said this, so I'm just going to say this too, is like, I don't want people to get to that space where then they use that excuse where like, oh, well, that's cultural difference, right? I've experienced times where I had to pause myself because I want to pull out the R card too. And I'm like, actually, Fong, I'm assessing the space. This is cultural difference. There's just like a lot of different things here. People don't know about each other. It looks a little bit different than racism. So I think what I'm trying to say is that what happens if people are now using cultural difference not as a way of like connecting, but a way to um, hide their racism? Does that make sense?
Yeah, like we can let ourselves off the hook.
Yeah.
Let
So
it
that's I also, so who knows, right? Everyone who's listening, they have a different entry point to their understanding of what racial equity is. And so I don't know, I feel like what would you say to that?
I think the distinction is to say, and this is what we did in that session.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
thank you for teasing this up or, making sure like let's put a fine point on it. That your attempt to show respect and to show your sorrow that you couldn't better serve this person landed as fragility, like you couldn't hold them, which feels like racism to them. And so your intention was not to diminish them, but that was the impact. And that is racism, right? So it doesn't actually matter for racism to work to what your intention versus the impact is. It's only impact. And so
Right.
we need to work on these behaviors. So I think what I'm trying to separate is like that intention versus impact. If we start by labeling it racism and you start with like a depiction of like, here's all the ways that we have inequity in our space, it like that entry point, it lands on the people who we want to have their behavior change. It puts them in a defensive mode. And so
Right.
putting them in an open mode so that they can engage. And then we build our case up to the point where we can still use the label, right? This is racism and it's not acceptable. And that's why we're doing this training. We want everyone to feel included and supported. And there are times we have to give disappointing news and people take that badly sometimes. And we need to learn how to hold space for people's anger. That's part of the services that we have to provide, and we can't expect everyone to show anger in the same way. And if you do, we're going to end up creating a culture of exclusion, which will land as racism. So we can
Right.
get there. We can still get to
Yeah.
that same language. I'm just thinking like, do we need to enter from that? And I think you do if you think it'll impact people's choices. But if you've got a group that doesn't have that analysis yet, doesn't know how to critically engage with those ideas, like if you describe the way you described your own learning, like how you were socialized to learn and perform respect. If you have a group that you're like, they're not actually asking the questions that they have, the chance that we'll end up using these big, scary words and
Yeah.
making people feel even more scared, like we don't have engaged minds, and then we won't get change.
Mm, that's good. That's really good. And wow. Um, this is one of those things that I feel like we need to get examples from folks so then we can slow it way down and go off of that starting point that you're talking about is first to understand and see where folks are, what's the starting point. So tell us what you think, y'all. This is another one of our episodes where we know that the conversation is going to become more rich with your insights. So drop a comment, let us know. Let us know if you want to come on with us, and we can do a session 2 on this. Thank you, Sangeeta, so much for bringing this topic to this episode because it's really inviting us to be culturally curious and understand there is a level of cultural competencies, cultural humility to support our cultural expansiveness, right? And so we hope this was a good listen, y'all. Until the next time, drop your comments. We want to hear from you. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
We hope this conversation provided helpful insight and inspired you to create a more inclusive and liberated workplace. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. Your support makes a huge difference in helping us reach more listeners like you. We love to hear your thoughts on today's topic. Connect with us on social media and drop a comment. You can find all the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.